So, when you think of ancient empires, what comes to mind? Probably Rome, right? Or maybe Egypt. But what if I told you that empires just as massive, just as complex, and just as brilliant existed right here in the Americas? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on that incredible story.
For the longest time, the story we were all told was that before Columbus, the Americas were basically this vast, empty, untamed wilderness. But the reality? Oh, it is so much more spectacular. We're talking about millions of people living in sprawling cities and incredibly sophisticated civilizations that shaped this continent for centuries.
So, the big question is, how did this all happen? How do you build an entire civilization, let alone an empire, from the ground up? Well, in the Americas, it all kicked off not with a sword, but with a single, pretty humble crop, maize, or as we call it, corn. And it set off this incredibly powerful, but kind of simple chain reaction. See, once people figured out how to domesticate maize, they could create a reliable food surplus. All of a sudden, you don't need everyone working the fields. That surplus can support way more people living closer together, and it frees up folks to become builders, priests, scientists, and leaders, the very people who architect complex societies. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some local thing. This corn revolution was the engine that powered huge changes all across the continent, from the amazing cliff dwellings of the Pueblo peoples out in the Southwest to the massive mound-building cultures that thrived all along the Mississippi River. Okay, so you've got food, you've got people. What comes next? Power. The power to literally reshape the world around you. And with these large, stable populations, these civilizations started engineering on a scale that, honestly, still kind of boggles the mind today. Just try to imagine this. A massive, glittering capital city, home to hundreds of thousands of people, built on an island in the middle of a lake. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? But it was real. This was Tenochtitlan, the absolute heart of the Aztec Empire. Think of it like a Venice, but in the Americas. No roads, just this massive grid of canals for getting around. And to feed everybody on an island, they built these ingenious floating gardens right there on the water. And looming over all of it were these enormous temples and palaces. At the time, this was one of the largest, most impressive cities on the entire planet. And let's talk about these chinampas for a second, because they are just incredible. These were not just, some rafts with dirt piled on top. No way. These were man-made islands, highly productive agricultural plots that were literally woven into the lake itself. A perfect blend of nature and engineering that could feed a giant city.
But hey, the Aztecs weren't the only ones doing incredible things. Over in Oaxaca, Mexico, the Zapotec civilization tackled a totally different problem. Instead of building on a lake, they literally leveled an entire mountaintop to build their capital, Monte Alban, a city in the clouds.
All right, let's head even further south to the Andes Mountains. Here, the Inca had to figure out how to hold together a massive empire, stretching across some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. So how did they do it? Well, they built one of the most extensive road systems in the ancient world. Seriously, it rivaled what the Romans were doing.
Okay, but let's bring it back up north, because we can't forget about North America. Right near where St. Louis is today, a massive city rose up from the earth. For a time, it was the biggest city north of Mexico, the metropolis of Cahokia. So get this, at its height, we think around 30,000 people called this place home. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than London was at the same time. It was this bustling hub of trade and culture, all centered around these huge ceremonial earth mounds you can actually still go and see today. But these amazing engineering feats weren't just about practical stuff like cities. Down in the super dry deserts of Peru, the Nazca culture created something else, something mysterious and beautiful. They carved these massive, massive images right into the desert floor. And when I say massive, I mean it. These aren't little doodles. Some of these things, like the animal figures, are over 1,200 feet long. They're so huge, you can only really see what they are from way up in the sky. It's like a giant art gallery for the gods, etched into the earth itself. Okay, so we've talked about all this incredible building, the hardware, right? But an empire is so much more than stone and soil. It's the systems, the beliefs, the communication, the government that really makes it all run. It's the software of a society. Let's take the Inca, for example. They ran this enormous empire without a writing system, at least not one we'd recognize. Instead, they used something called a quipu.
It's this really complex system of colored strings and knots that let them keep records, track goods, and communicate huge amounts of information.
And what's so cool is that all across the Americas, every civilization had its own special brand of genius. You had the Olmec, one of the earliest, carving those giant stone heads. The Maya developed this incredibly sophisticated alphabet, and their astronomy was just pinpoint accurate. And the Aztecs, well, they were masters of urban engineering and built their empire on a powerful tribute system. Each one had brilliant solutions to different problems.
And again, this kind of complex society wasn't just happening down in Mesoamerica. Up in North America, you had powerful political groups like the Iroquois Confederacy. You had nations like the Creek, Choctaw, and Cherokee who managed huge farming and trade networks. And out in the Southwest, the Pueblo tribes were engineering these amazing irrigation systems. The point is, these were anything but simple societies.
Yeah, this kind of political savvy was everywhere you looked. The Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, was such a successful and stable alliance that its structure and its influence were felt in the Northeast for centuries. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you're left with this incredible legacy written in stone, but also a really fascinating paradox, a paradox of innovation. Just think for a second about what they accomplished. We're talking about advanced mathematics, monumental engineering, astronomical observations so precise they could create incredibly complex calendars, not to mention complex social structures and trade networks that spanned the continent. These were societies with serious intellectual firepower. Now here's the part that just blows my mind. Think about what they did it all without. They did all of this with no wheels for transport, no large draft animals like horses or oxen to pull heavy loads, and for most of their history, they didn't have hard metal tools like iron or steel.
I mean, they built empires on a scale that could go toe-to-toe with Rome, all without the basic tools the old world completely took for granted. That doesn't make them less advanced. If anything, it makes what they accomplished even more remarkable.
And that really leaves us with one last big question. The name New World always kind of implied it was an empty place, a blank slate. But if these are the kinds of empires that were here all along, what else about our own history is just sitting there waiting for us to rediscover it?